Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you here this morning in Gaston Hall. And today we're honored to be joined by our nation's Secretary of Veterans Affairs, the Honorable Robert McDonald. And we're grateful for this opportunity to engage his perspective on topics that resonate deeply with our community: service, values, leadership, and to learn how they take shape within his work at the Department of Veterans Affairs. And to introduce the Secretary, we're honored to have with us today former Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel, who served as Secretary from 2013 to 2015, and now serves as Distinguished Executive in Residence here at Georgetown. Secretaries Hagel and McDonald, I wish to thank you both for your presence here today. I also wish to express my appreciation to everyone who has helped to make our gathering today possible, including Dr. Joel Coopersmith, who serves as a member of our faculty at our medical center and previously served as Chief Research and Development Officer for the Veterans Health Administration. Lanaya Heasel, the Director of our Veterans Office here at Georgetown, who will serve as our moderator for audience questions a little bit later in the program. And it's a great honor to be able to convene this conversation here at Georgetown at a moment when so many young women and men who have served our country are choosing to bring their talents here to our community. At the undergraduate and graduate levels across our campuses, we currently have more than 550 students who are veterans or who are engaged in active duty. Many more come from military families as dependents or spouses of members of our armed services. These women and men bring to our community unique talents, perspectives, experiences that enrich our shared life here deeply. As students, scholars, and colleagues, they represent the ideals to which we aspire: a dedication to service, a commitment to each other, an ambition to living in accordance with our most deeply held values. And they challenge us as a community to always strive to be our very best selves, to do our very best work. As a university, we are committed to engaging the resources of our community to improve life for veterans here at Georgetown and in the world beyond Healy Gates. Across disciplines and campuses, our faculty are engaged in unique research related to veterans' health and well-being. They are assessing the moral and psychological impacts of war, studying Gulf War illness, advancing prosthetic arm function. They're also contributing to innovative partnerships, such as Dog Tag Bakery and Project Rebirth, that build resilience and help members of the armed forces transition to new roles in society. So I wish to thank all of you for your presence here today and for the ways that you support this commitment we have to the veterans in our community and into promoting the study of issues that are important to the veteran experience. Again, we're deeply grateful to have Secretary McDonald here with us today to share his perspectives and insights. And now it's my pleasure to welcome to the podium a distinguished leader and veteran, a dear friend of Georgetown, Secretary Chuck Hagel, who will introduce the Secretary. Chuck.
Mr. President, a high honor indeed to be in your presence. Thank you very much, and thanks to all of you who helped organize this event. I want to make just a couple of preliminary comments as I introduce my friend, former cabinet colleague, and distinguished Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Bob McDonald. A couple of the points that the president of Georgetown University has just made about values and dedication, commitment, standards, excellence, really do fold into what Bob McDonald and everyone at the VA does every day for very special people and their families who are selfless in their giving and contribute so much, not just to the security of this country, but to the essence of who we are. The fiber, the goodness, the appreciation for what we have in this country, and also a very clear appreciation for the appreciation and obligation and responsibility that each of us have now to continue to build on what we have inherited, been fortunate enough to inherit, to do our jobs even more successfully and more purposefully. When I was Secretary of Defense, I would often note when we talked, and we talked often, the Defense Department and the Veterans Department, because we needed to, that it was the Defense Department that built the veterans, and then that veteran was handed off to the Veterans Administration. So the process from start to finish was not just the responsibility of one department. It was the responsibility of a number of departments, but specifically the Defense Department and the Veterans Affairs Department. To take the job that Bob McDonald has is not one for timid souls who are concerned about their own political well-being or about any aspect of themselves, other than they want to make a better world and they want to do as much as they can to contribute to that world, in particular to help these men and women who give so much and their families and who make so many sacrifices for our country. Jim Nicholson is here, a former secretary. Jim, it's good to see you. I'm glad that you're here. The people who have gone before Bob in the job that he has now, all distinguished Americans. General Rick Shinseki is a friend to all of us. A special man, Sloan Gibson, Bob McDonald's deputy, also a classmate, former classmate, West Point graduate with Bob. These are pretty unique individuals who have built their lives around making contributions to their country different ways, through different institutions, but the one core, the one center, has been their focus on making a better world. And for Bob McDonald to take on this job at about as difficult a time in Veterans Affairs is pretty significant. To be able to get the kind of quality that this country got in Bob McDonald, Sloan Gibson, building on to what Jim Nicholson and Shinseki and our past secretaries and administrators before the VA was a cabinet department, says an awful lot about our institution and about the fact that Americans do care about their veterans. We've had ups and downs over the years. Sometimes our veterans come back and they have not been recognized and helped as much as they should have been. I think those days are gone. We've learned a lot. We have been able to, as the saying goes, separate the war from the warrior. And Bob continues to build on that. Bob McDonald, I don't know if I wouldn't say, he might say this, I don't know if he runs the VA, but what I've always said in these big jobs, you lead. Nobody is smart enough, big enough to run anything, certainly big institutions. But you lead institutions because there are so many leaders within those institutions that matter, that also help shape an institution and build a culture and continue to focus an institution in a certain direction. Bob knows how to do that. You all know his bio, and I'm not going to recite the accomplishments of what he has done since he graduated the top 2% of his class at West Point. Bob's very humble and says the standards were much lower. When he graduated that high, I think, again, he's just trying to throw us off the track and be far too humble. But he's accomplished an awful lot in his career in many areas of expertise. And to be able to take that, bring that to the second largest department in the federal government, I think your budget's around $170 billion now, maybe more than that. It's the second largest in our government, which is not insignificant. Over 300,000 employees. fairly significant. But the complications of the job, the complications of what the VA does, the day-to-day health care, the research, the astounding breakthrough advances in medicine and in health care, the organization of this, the structures of it, the people. Each state is different. Each community is different. As a former United States Senator, having Veterans Administration department facilities in my state of Nebraska, each was different because each part of the country is different. Cultures are different, but you have to keep a consistency of quality and access to that quality. So this job that he's got, and you're about to hear from a pretty unique American, is as complicated a job in this town as there is. And there are a few complicated jobs in this town, but I don't know how many are more complicated than Secretary of Veterans Affairs. And to you, ladies and gentlemen, I am most grateful that you would come give some of your time to get a little sense of what this is about and hear from one of America's great leaders who I'm very proud to introduce and call a friend, Bob McDonald. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm humbled to be here, and it's great to be in front of you, and I'm so thankful to see so many friends. And Jim, I appreciate you being here. What I want to do is share with you some thoughts about leadership based on the mistakes I've made over my 63 years. Hopefully, from the aspect that by sharing these mistakes and some of the direction with you, you might be able to learn from them and not make the same mistakes. When I think about leadership, I think about character and values and the importance of those values animating our behavior as leaders. And I know Chuck Hagel is one of those leaders. Chuck is one of those leaders that has values, and those values animate what he does. I mean, one of the things that I knew about was that when he was at the Department of Veterans Affairs some years ago, after having won 2 Purple Hearts in Vietnam, and his boss thought that Agent Orange was a fictitious problem in our country, Chuck tried to make a change, and when the change couldn't happen, he resigned in protest. And what we later found out through the science is Agent Orange is a real problem. It created terrible diseases for our veterans who were in Vietnam. That's the kind of character that great leaders have. And I know all of you are great leaders. You wouldn't be at Georgetown University otherwise. But let's shine a light on the values and the character and what that means. I thought I would start by a little bit introducing the importance of values and character at the VA. The VA started, really the inspiration for the VA was the Civil War. During the Civil War, 750,000 Americans lost their lives. And that's about 514 Americans dying every day for 4 consecutive years. Imagine that. And during that time, there were no dog tags. There was no way to identify bodies. The carnage in the world and in the battlefield was much worse than anyone expected. So most of the dead soldiers were buried in mass graves and unidentified. And it was President Lincoln in 1862 working with Congress that said that we've got to dig up these bodies, we've got to try to identify them and give them the proper burials that they deserve. The forerunner of the VA is what did that work. Dug them up. We still have all the records in our office if you're interested in seeing them on Vermont Avenue. We were able to identify 66% of the bodies that were dug up. And then in the second inaugural address, President Lincoln said, we've got to care for him who's borne the battle, his widow, and his orphan. And we reburied all of those bodies in national cemeteries all across the United States. Those national cemeteries we continue to administer today, and they are national shrines for all of us. So that second inaugural address really is what provided the basis or the inspiration for the VA. And that is the part of the values that we hold true today. We've changed the statement a little bit. We now say to care for those who have borne the battle, their widows or their survivors, because 11%, 12% of our veterans today are women, And that percentage is going to continue to rise as the Department of Defense opens up more and more positions for women in our military. That creates a huge challenge for us to transform the VA to be able to better care for female veterans and families, not just what was at one time male soldiers. The values of the VA are a great set of values. We use this acronym I-CARE: integrity, commitment, advocacy, respect, and excellence. And one of the things I did when I first became secretary is I tried to discover what went wrong that created the crisis in 2014. When I think of a high-performance organization, I always start with the purpose and the values of the organization. If you want to understand an organization, whether it's in Japan or in Brussels or in the Philippines, many of the places I lived in my business career, you always start with the foundational purpose and values, not just what they're written on or whether they're on a wall of a conference room, but are the people living that purpose and those values every single day? Because as I said, that should animate their behavior. And of course, as you know, in 2014, we had individuals in the VA that were lying about scheduling, that were lying about getting veterans the care they deserve. They certainly weren't exhibiting that value of integrity. They weren't exhibiting that value of excellence. Some weren't exhibiting that value of respect. And so I did an analysis that said, you know, what's going on here? What I discovered was we were not making those values as pervasive as they needed to be in the organization. So one of the first things we did is we did values training. We had everybody recommit themselves to purpose and the values. And we do that now as an ongoing basis as part of our leadership training. That's how important purpose and values are to an organization. We're organized into 3 different branches. Our largest is our healthcare system. We have about 2,000 points of care in this country. We have about 6 million regular veterans that use our healthcare system. The average veteran uses the VA for only about 34% of their healthcare. But one of the things we've noticed over the last couple of years, if we improve the care, more veterans will use the VA for more care. And this creates a bit of an antagonist problem for me with Congress, because if we are successful in improving our business and providing more care, and that number goes from 34% to 35%, we need a $1.4 billion increase in our budget. And as you know, living in Washington, D.C., our government isn't quite as agile as a private sector business in addressing those kinds of increases in demand. We have our benefits organization. They pay all the benefits. GI Bill, I got my graduate degree on the GI Bill. I got my first home mortgage using a VA guaranteed home mortgage. VA guaranteed home mortgages are great because there's no down payment, because the VA guarantees it. There's also no private mortgage insurance. And usually you get a better interest rate than you would get in the private sector. So I was really lucky in 1980. I left the Army. My first house I bought with a VA mortgage. I got a great interest rate, 21.5%. That was a great rate in those days. Obviously, it's changed. And then, of course, the Cemetery Administration, which is in a sense, our forerunner, where the inspiration comes from. As we talk about purpose and values, what I'd like to have you think about is, what is your purpose in life? You know, you're all great leaders. You've gotten into one of the best universities in the world, in Georgetown. What is your purpose in life? And have you ever gone through an analysis to say, what should your purpose be? One of the things I did about 30 years ago is I did a little exercise, and I helped a couple of guys write a book called The Leader's Compass. And in that book, we talk about the importance of getting in touch with what your purpose is and what are the values that animate that purpose. And what you do is you look at your past and you see, what are the things you enjoy doing? What are the experiences that you were attracted to? How were you acculturated? And how do the events in your life shape that purpose? So in other words, you can look at the cathartic events in your life, and those actually come back to shape your purpose and shape your values. Noel Tichy, a friend of mine from the University of Michigan, wrote a book called The Leadership Engine. And what he talked about was the use of storytelling in leadership. As you'll find, as leaders, we all tell stories. We tell stories from our experience. And they're typically stories of cathartic things that happen to us. And those cathartic events then lead to our value system, which then animates our purpose. So my point is as you're going through life now, and as you're graduating from Georgetown, and as you're going to be given more and more responsibility, while it may have been okay to be to allow your leadership just to be naturally exhibiting itself as the president of a high school, or as the president of a sorority or fraternity, or as a club president. But as you get larger and larger degrees of responsibility, more people, larger organizations, you need to be more and more deliberate about your leadership. And so what I'd like to do is I'm going to show you the way I've gone about this. Not that I want you to believe in the same things I believe in, but I'm going to tell you about my 9 leadership beliefs and how they animate things that I do. And then I'm going to tie them back to events in my life that caused those beliefs to occur. And if any of you would like help doing this, if you decide you want to take this on, I would be happy to help you do it, because I think it's so important to be more deliberate as you become more and more mature in life. I ran, before becoming the Secretary of VA, I ran a $85 billion global company with about 120,000 people all over the world. And I would go from country to country. And when you get off that airplane, those employees you interact with, that may be the only time they see the CEO of the company. You've got to think about your leadership and how you're going to impact that organization. So let's get started, and I'll do this very quickly. Not surprisingly, my first belief is very simple. Living a life based on a purpose, or inspired by a purpose, is going to lead to a more fulfilling life than meandering through life without direction. You know, how many of us really know what our purpose in life is? You don't have to raise your hand. But fast forward for me. Assume you're my age, or maybe even older, and you're in the Georgetown University Hospital. You're going to die. Your loved ones are around you. And they say, did you accomplish your purpose in life? What would you say? Would you say, gee, I don't know, I didn't think about it? Gosh, I'm almost there. Gee, I've been so busy reacting to my cell phone, my pager, that I'm reacting to things. I'm not getting to where I need to go. Today's world, it's very easy to get distracted by simply reacting to electronic devices or reacting to other things without having a purposeful life that leads in a certain direction. Certainly, Georgetown and the Society of Jesuits knows more about that than anyone. But this is something I think that's worth spending some time on before it's too late. You know, in my own life, I was a Boy Scout. I enjoyed Boy Scouts. I liked the Boy Scout motto, help other people at all times. I wanted to go to West Point to free those living in non-free societies. I joined the 82nd Airborne Division because I wanted to be on the tip of the spear. I went to airborne school, ranger school, jungle warfare, Arctic warfare. I joined the Procter & Gamble Company because of the purpose of the company. The purpose of the Procter & Gamble Company is to improve the lives of the world's consumers. I'm proud but humble to say that when I was there as CEO, we went from serving 4 billion consumers in the world to serving 5 billion consumers every single day. And through our products and our services, we improve people's lives. And then, of course, when I got a call from the White House about doing this job at the VA, you can see the similarities in that purpose and the other things I was doing. So it was a no-brainer to say, I'm on my way, want to do it, want to do everything I can to help. Second point is you've got to make that purpose pervasive in the organization. It doesn't do any good to have a purpose and simply put it in a file drawer or put it on the wall of a conference room. You've got to make it pervasive. Now, in the private sector, this means you've got to take your purpose and you've got to make sure your company does well as doing good. What I mean by that, you have to do well financially, that's your shareholders, but you also have to do good at the same time. So at the Procter & Gamble Company, a few years ago, I made a commitment that we would save 1 life every hour by the year 2020. The reason for that is we invented some chemistry you can use to clean up water. And water is the biggest problem in our world today. 2,000 children die a day from drinking unclean water. 2,000 children, that's a travesty. And I've been in many of those countries where you're upstream and the water buffalo's defecating. You go downstream and there's a young boy with a bucket collecting the water for his family. And water's a woman's issue. The average woman in a developing country walks 7 kilometers a day to get water for her family. And then she has to boil it and strain it. So this idea of providing these cleaning packets and cleaning water was important. Now you might say, well, you're a for-profit company. Why would you do that? That's philanthropic. And I would say, yeah, but it's so consistent with our purpose. If our purpose is to help lives by producing laundry detergent that cleans clothes, and believe it or not, that does matter to families, then why shouldn't you also use a technology that you've invented to save lives from drinking unclean water? So making that purpose pervasive and making those values pervasive and getting people to recommit themselves to it, as we've done at the VA on a periodic basis, becomes very important. Obviously, we do everything we can at the VA now to make sure that we're making sure those values and that purpose are front and center. And part of that recommitment every year is getting involved with veteran service organizations like the one in the middle here, Team Red, White, and Blue, and doing other things to make sure that our customers know those values are what animate us every single day. Third point, and it's a very simple one, everyone wants to succeed and success is contagious. Think for me about this morning when you rolled out of bed here at Georgetown. Let's say you rolled out of your dormitory bed, your feet touched the floor. How many of you, when you rolled out of bed, thought to yourself, I want to get up today and prove to everybody at Georgetown that I am the world's biggest failure? Just raise your hand. Just raise your hand if you didn't do that? I'm surprised. I thought nobody here did that? Well, I got to tell you, I've talked all over the world, and I've never found anybody in this world that tries to fail. So the question I have for you as leaders is, do we spend enough time catching people succeeding, or do we spend all of our time trying to catch people failing? Well, how many of you have too much time on your hands? Anybody have too much time on their hands? Of course not. We don't have too much time on our hands. So what we end up doing, because we're always time-starved, is we end up managing by exception. We wait for something to go wrong, then we go find out why it went wrong, and we try to correct it. So what I'm trying to do as a leader, and I'm still a work in progress, and I'm working hard at it, is how can I work harder to catch people succeeding and take that little task that I might have given them, train them, and make it a bigger task. I really noticed this in my first platoon, the 82nd Airborne Division. Very few of my soldiers had graduated from high school, and graduating from jump school, parachute school, was probably the biggest thing they'd ever done. And my job as a leader, even though these individuals, many of them had been told they were unsuccessful throughout their lives, was to tap into that little intuition inside them that showed that they wanted to be successful and that they would work hard to do that. And so we worked really hard on that. And of course, success is contagious. People want to be part of a winning team. Have you ever seen anybody wear the baseball or football garb of a losing team? You know, the Redskins start winning, everybody starts buying Redskins clothes. There's only one exception to this rule. I was born in Gary, Indiana. I grew up in Chicago. My parents still love the Chicago Cubs. This year they won, so we'll see. Number 4, putting people in the right jobs is the most important job of a leader. I don't care who it is you talk to, what CEO, what secretary, what they will tell you, it takes too long to get the right leadership team in place. My friend Jim Collins, who wrote the books Built to Last, Good to Great, I think one of the very best leadership authors, talks about getting the right people in the bus and getting them on the right seats in the bus. I can tell you from all of my leadership experience around the world, that is the hardest thing to do as fast as you can do it. Now at the VA, I've been there about a year and a half. 10 of my 16 direct reports have come in since I've been the secretary, 10 of 16. And boy, I wished I could have done it faster. But dealing with things like Senate confirmation, recruiting, and other things, it's very hard to do. But you can't spend too much time on recruiting the right leadership team and getting them in place. Number 5, and I've talked a lot about character already, but character is the most important trait of a leader. And I define character a little bit differently. Those of us who have been in military service typically define character as putting the needs of the organization above your own, above yourself. And one of the things you learn in the Army, as an officer in the Army, and this is one of the first things you learn the very first day at West Point, is you always eat after your soldiers. You never eat before your soldiers eat. Now, I can tell you probably in my experience, Chuck, or Jim's experience, we never ran out of food. It wasn't that you're going to run out of food, but it's the symbolic nature, the symbolic communication that those soldiers' lives are more important than yours, and you're going to put them first. So that becomes a very important part. Now, Jim Collins picked up on this. In his book, Good to Great, he talked about something called Level 5 leadership. Level 5 leadership, he found, were some of the best organizations in the world were those led by individuals whose ambition was for the organization and not themselves. They weren't necessarily the CEOs on the cover of Fortune magazine, but they were those who put the needs of the organization above themselves. The second part of character, which I think is equally important, but maybe not be as popular in our society, is taking personal responsibility. One of the things you learn the very first day at West Point, you're what's called a new cadet. You go in the summer before the academic year. And new cadet's the lowest form of life on earth, deeper in the deepest ocean than the biggest whale. That's a new cadet. And you're taught that very quickly. And one of the things you learn your very first day is that anything that happens to you, you only have 4 acceptable answers, only 4 answers. So imagine I'm getting ready for formation the first day. I'm walking out to formation. Somebody steps in a mud puddle, sprays mud all over my trousers and my shoes. Obviously, they're supposed to be shined and pressed. An upperclassman stops me, and of course, you have to stand at attention. And they say, "McDonald, you toolbox, didn't you prepare your trousers and your shoes for formation?" So I start rolling through my 4 answers. When I was at West Point, there were only men, so I used the male gender. So I could say, "Yes, sir." But if I say, "Yes, sir," that really doesn't advance the conversation. That's probably not the right acceptable answer. Second one is "No, sir." But if I say, "No, sir," something happened, that would be an honor violation. I get thrown out of the institution. That's obviously not a good idea. So I oftentimes use that third answer. And that third answer I used during my first few months. It was, "Sir, I do not understand." And everything bad that happened to me at West Point those first few weeks, I was in a fog. I mean, I had never been to a place like this. I kept saying, "Sir, I do not understand. Sir, I do not understand." So they sent me to the hospital for an audiology test. You know, you press the button, they thought I was hard of hearing. I wasn't hard of hearing, but I was slow in learning. You know, the acceptable answer was the 4th answer, the most powerful answer in the world. You know what it is? Exactly, "No excuse, sir. No excuse." It's the most powerful answer in the world. Why is it powerful? Because you're taking responsibility, and of course, implicit in that answer is that it won't happen again. You'll take the steps to make sure it won't happen again. There's part of the West Point Cadet Prayer that has stuck with me. I'm quite a faithful believer in God, and I was very active in the church at West Point. The West Point Cadet Prayer is a wonderful statement, supplication. But the part that stuck with me over my life is this idea of choosing the harder right rather than the easier wrong. You see this a lot in business. I mean, when you read about the scandals that occur in business, they usually don't start with a big problem and a big solution or a big step taken that was immoral or unethical. It always starts with something small. And that something small gets bigger and bigger and bigger over time. So you have to be on guard. If something seems easy to do, it's probably the wrong thing. If something seems hard to do, it's probably the right thing. So God, help me to choose the harder right rather than the easier wrong, no matter how many people Congress wants me to fire, even when they shouldn't be fired. Number 6, diverse groups of people are more innovative than homogeneous groups of people. I spent a lot of time at the Procter & Gamble company working very hard to put together teams of diverse groups of people. Of course, we had global diversity, you have gender diversity, you have all kinds of different degrees of diversity. But what I discovered in my career, and innovation is how we improve the way we improve lives, is innovation comes from diverse groups of people. I lived in Japan for 6 years, and I oftentimes competed with very homogeneous groups of people. I loved to recruit Japanese women because Japanese companies didn't recruit them. I could get outstanding Japanese women who would work for us all over the world. Well, innovation never happens in a straight line. There's an author, James Burke, from Cambridge University, wrote a book called Connections. It's a great book. And what he does is he follows inventions throughout time and discovers that it doesn't happen in a straight line. He likes to talk about the fact that Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone as a hearing aid. He worked in a deaf school. He never expected all of us to carry cell phones. Marconi invented the radio for 2 ships to communicate at sea. He never expected the radio to come on land. And my favorite is the founder of IBM, Thomas Watson. You may have heard this quote before. Thomas Watson, who's pictured here in this photograph, he said, "The United States may need 2 computers someday." Now, is that silly? Is that silly? No. What was happening, if you go to the Smithsonian and look at the first computers, what was happening, what was the computer used for? The computer was used to take the census of the country. People would go door to door with these cards called Hollerith cards that I used in computer science, 1971. They'd punch holes in them, and the computer would take the census of the country. They never expected that purpose for the computer to be expanded to other uses. Now, the difficulty of running a diverse organization is the golden rule no longer works. You know, those of you who had your parents teach you the golden rule, treat others the way you want to be treated, that doesn't work in a diverse organization because other people aren't like you, particularly if you're getting into a global organization. So you have to follow what I call the platinum rule, which is treat other people the way they want to be treated. Now, this is an incredibly high bar, almost an impossible bar to get over, because what does that mean? If you're going to treat other people the way they want to be treated, that means you need to know them. You need to know them personally. You need to know their families, their wants, their desires. You need to know everything about them so that you can inspire them. Number 7, ineffective strategies, systems, and culture are bigger barriers to achievement than the talents of people. So if you're a leader, and let's say you're a leader of a club here at Georgetown or the captain of an athletic team, and your club's not doing well or your team's not doing well, study your own leadership. Are you providing the leadership necessary to get the job done? I have an axiom that I've had over my years in business and in government. Organizations are perfectly designed to get the results they get. So if you don't like the results you're getting, like we didn't like 2014, early 2014 in the VA, we've got to change something if we're going to improve. This learning came to me from a course I took from Dr. Edwards Deming. Anybody here know Dr. Deming? He wrote a book called Out of Crisis. He's a statistician, went to Japan, taught the Japanese total quality. Edwards Deming is the father of total quality. The exercise has a vat. In the vat are a bunch of plastic beads. Dr. Deming gives you a paddle, and in the paddle are holes. And he tells you to draw the paddle into the beads, shake it around, get the beads to fall in the holes, and then pull it out. There are white beads and red beads in the vat. So I did. I went in, I pulled it out. I had a combination of red beads and white beads. Dr. Deming said to me, "I want you to get all red beads, all red beads." And of course, after doing this 2 or 3 times and having the combination, Dr. Deming said, "McDonald, you toolbox." I felt like I was back at West Point. You know, "Why can't you do this?" And he started screaming at me. It was only after the exercise that Dr. Deming said that these beads were different diameters, and the paddles and the holes in the paddle were drilled in such a way that you had to get a combination of red beads and white beads. So he said to me, Dr. Deming said, "Bob, this is what you do to the people that work for you. You give them an unachievable goal, you give them an imperfect system, and then you scream at them to work harder." And that lesson has stuck with me throughout my career. So if something goes wrong in the organization, don't always first blame the people, but discover, have you provided the right leadership? Have you provided the right strategies? Have you provided the right culture? Have you provided the right technical competence? Have you done your training on the values and purpose of the organization? This is a model I've developed, which I call my high-performance organization model. It's a model I use whenever I analyze an organization. And when I got to VA, this is the first thing I did. I sat down, I traveled to various sites, and then analyzed the organization, shared that analysis with the President and the Congress as we plotted our way forward. Number 8, organizations have to renew themselves. Think of organizations as biological living plants or biological entities that are constantly growing over time. And of course, the world is changing around. If you look at the Fortune 50 from 1955, that was the first year that the Fortune 50 was published. Guess how many of those companies are still on that list? About 9. So 41 companies have gone away on that list. And today, the half-life of companies and the half-life of organizations is even faster, Now, what differentiates an organization, a high-performance organization that continues to succeed from one that doesn't? What differentiates an individual leader, yourself, from someone who succeeds versus someone who doesn't? My point of view, it's the ability to learn. You know, what I see is organizations that continue to renew themselves and do well and learn new things do wonderful things. I mean, think about it this way. All of you younger people here, and I can see you, you know, you're probably dissatisfied because your parents don't like text messages. Your parents want you to call them instead of text them. Your parents may not know how to use their cell phone, their smartphone, quite as adeptly as you do. Well, my question to you is, what's going to become your smartphone? Because certainly 30 years from now, 50 years from now, new things are going to happen. And all of us, to continue to be productive and efficient and contribute to the society we live in, we have to continually learn in order to be that way. I like to use my children as reverse mentors. They teach me, and then I teach them older things that they may not know. We're in the midst of a transformation in the VA right now. Our transformation is all about getting centered back on our customer. So obviously, strategy number 1 is improve the veteran experience. We're learning from the very best customer service organizations in the world how to do that. Our second strategy, not surprisingly also, I think, is improving the employee experience. It's not a surprise that the best customer service companies in the world are also the best places to work. You can't have one without the other. If you don't invest in the employees, they're not going to take care of your customer. 3 is improve internal support services. Many of our financial management system that we manage our $180 billion budget with is written in COBOL. COBOL is a language I wrote at West Point in 1971. It's not a good language. Establish a culture of continuous improvement. We're teaching your organization Lean Six Sigma and asking employees to get involved in the changes that they're trying to create. And number 5 is enhancing strategic partnerships. We know we can't do this job by ourselves. We need the help of everyone. And as a result, we're creating strategic partnerships all over the country. Number 9, last but maybe most important, the true test of a leader isn't what happens when you're in charge of the organization. It's what happens after you leave. In fact, most CEOs work most of the day on things that will never happen while they're CEO of the company. It's kind of disappointing, really. I mean, when you think about it, you're spending all your time on building an organization that will affect change later versus when you're actually there. Jim Collins likes to talk about this. I love this statement Jim uses. He talked about it in Built to Last. He said, leadership is about building a clock rather than telling time. I love that, because that's what we should do as leaders. We should do things that build organization capability, that put the next leadership in place, that pick the right strategies to last for the next decade, that get the organization ready for the future, that helps the organization learn. Those are the tests of really a remarkable leader. So how's the organization going to perform when you're not there? When I think about leadership, I think about a model that we helped create at the Procter & Gamble Company called the 5 E's. Envision, create the vision for the organization. What does winning look like 5 years from now? Now, you're not doing this by yourself, so you have to engage other people in that. Engage people, so it's an organization vision. Our vision at the VA is to be the #1 customer service organization in government. And once we achieve that, we'll go on and say in the world. Energize, you have to inspire other people to that vision so that they are attracted to it and that their behavior every day leads to accomplishing that vision. Enable. Of all my work, enable is the one that most leaders don't spend enough time on. Enable is about building organization capability to get the job done. So that financial management system that's written in COBOL, we've got to change it. It's hard work, but we've got to. The scheduling system that dates to 1985, it looks like green screen MS-DOS, we've got to change that. You know, hard work, but building capability becomes incredibly important. If you go to the Georgetown Library, you won't find a single book on leadership and of building organization capability, but it's so important. And last but not least is execute. If you don't execute your strategies, nobody will know about them. So your execution has to be perfect as well. And execution, I think it was Napoleon who said that the only strategy the soldier sees on the battlefield is obviously what gets executed. So those are my thoughts about purpose, values, leadership. I would love to help you. If you want to develop your own list of your leadership beliefs and you want to determine what your purpose is in life, I would love to help you. Again, my email address is bob.mcdonald@va.gov. Again, as you progress in your leadership, as you get more and more responsibility, you need to be more and more deliberate about your leadership. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you again, Secretary McDonald, for Bob. Okay. For engaging us today on topics of success and leadership and values and character. I definitely learned a lot, and I hope that our audience has as well here at Georgetown. So we're going to now transition to the Q&As, and I'll ask members of the audience. There's a microphone in the center if you wish to ask a question. When you go to ask a question, I just ask that you provide your name and your affiliation, and we can go from there. But I'll go ahead and throw the first one out.
Sure.
Hopefully the experience isn't the same as being on the Hill. It's a little more relaxed. But since we're here at Georgetown University, an institution of higher education, the spirit of the GI Bill is pretty important to us here. And the spirit of the GI Bill is to provide a service member's opportunity to transition from the military into civilian life through education and career opportunities. With the advancement of VA education benefits, we're seeing more and more military students coming to campuses through post-9/11 GI Bill and many other chapters. But due to an all-volunteer force, we're seeing a larger military-civilian divide. And so campuses are having a bit of a challenge of being able to provide the services and needs to help them actually transition into civilian. Through your leadership at the VA, do you foresee the opportunity for the Department of Veterans Affairs to work with higher education to provide better support for higher education institutions to be able to provide that?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's nothing that we do that's more important to me than the GI Bill. My father-in-law were first members of their family to graduate from college because they served during World War II or post-World War II. They used the GI Bill. I wouldn't have got my graduate degree without the GI Bill. And of course, I went to West Point, which is, I guess you could say it's free in a sense. But so what I've seen, and I said this earlier when I was with the president, is education is transformational. And anything we can do to use those educational experiences to transform someone's life is, there's no higher calling. So one of the things we're trying to do is put VA employees actually on campus in many of locations around the country. And what those VA employees do, it's not known to the students generally, but they can be psychiatrists or psychologists. So those who have gone through battlefield experiences who might have post-traumatic stress have ready help there at the university while they're studying or doing other activity, and also can reach back into VA to bring forward any resources that are needed. So that's it's a program called VITAL, VITAL, that we're trying to do.
Great.
Thank you for your question.
Sure. Okay, let's you go.
Good morning. My name is Anabi Adoga. I am a senior in the college here, and I currently chair a student-run philanthropic organization. And my question for you is, like it seems like in the private sector and a lot of places where you're employing people, like coercion is kind of used to try and get people to do, things that you want them to do. My question is, how do you appeal to people's philanthropic nature? Like my organization is trying to get as many people in my class to give back to Georgetown in some way. So how do you appeal to people to get them to do things they don't have to do,
Right.
but that would be incredibly beneficial for other people? Do you appeal to their self-interest? Do you appeal to that light inside of them? Like, how do you do that?
My answer may not be a very good one because I'm not a very good fundraiser, but I'll tell you one thing I'm pretty well sure of. People like to be part of something that's bigger than themselves. I mean, the reason many of us joined the military was to be part of an organization that had a purpose that was unassailable. How do you make the world free for democracy? How do you free people living behind the Iron Curtain? That purpose becomes very important, and if you can connect on the level of purpose, what are you going to do with that money, and then make them part of something that's bigger than them and make sure they get whatever individual reward they're looking for from that, I typically find people will step up, because we all want to be part of something that's bigger than ourselves. We were talking earlier, one of the things I'm seeing in veteran service organizations, these are organizations that help veterans transition back into the community. The ones that are being successful today amongst young people are those that take that purpose a soldier may have on the battlefield and redirect it to improving society. So there's a guy named Jake Wood who played football at the University of Wisconsin who created something called Team Rubicon. He takes veterans coming off the battlefield, and then as they get out of the service, he actually takes them on service-oriented projects, whether it's the floods in Texas or the earthquake in Nepal. Team Rubicon goes there, and they help people. Everybody loves to be part of something that's bigger than them, that makes a difference in the world. Sometimes it's hard to get that to connect on a practical level with each individual, but that's what I would suggest.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Secretary. My name is John Whitmore. I'm a senior ROTC cadet at Georgetown. I just first want to thank you very much for your remarks this morning. They were very inspiring.
Thank you, John.
I'm actually glad you brought up Team Rubicon because a similar organization this week, the New York Times put out an article about the Wounded Warrior Project, calling into question their values and the leadership of that organization, especially regarding some claims of lavish spending. And my question for you is, would your advice this morning for leadership in these sort of organizations be different for the private sector versus the public sector? What can these sort of organizations do to improve themselves that might be different than what you have done back in 2014?
Well, I think, as I think about all these organizations, John, that are designed to help veterans, I always look at them from the standpoint of the veteran. I think one of the mistakes we made maybe in 2013, 2014, and sometimes gets made in government, is we look at things from the bureaucracy to the citizen rather than from the veteran back to the bureaucracy. And one of the things I've tried to do is get people to look at it the other way. And as you look at that, then you have a very different perspective on the value of that organization and whether or not they're actually making a meaningful difference in the lives of veterans. And that's, in the end, that's all that counts, is are we making a meaningful difference in the lives of veterans? Are we providing, in our case, are we providing for them the benefits that they've already earned on the battlefields or in the service of our country? So that would be my advice, number one. I'm not deep in the debate that's going on right now because I know there's a lot of data out there that's just conflicting. But obviously what we're about is making sure that we focus on helping veterans.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Secretary.
you, John.
Good morning. Thank you so much to you and our other guests for your extraordinary service and for your really important intellectual leadership. I have two quick questions.
Yes, ma'am.
The first is, I'm Professor Irene Jolson from the School of Nursing and Health Studies at Georgetown. The first is, there is, as you know, been quite a lot of work over the last 12, 15 years on ethical leadership,
Yes.
including the development of really good measures of leadership. And I wonder if you could speak to your view of the feasibility of applying those measures, because most of them have been applied ex post facto, prospectively to hiring, training, promotions, et cetera. That's the first question. And the second is, there's a lot of discussion whenever an issue arises, such as Flint, Michigan, of negative behaviors. All too rarely are positive, courageous, ethical behaviors of individuals mentioned. And in that regard, there's the academic environmental specialist and the very heroic Iraqi-American pediatrician, without whom we would not know about this.
Right.
So I wonder if you could speak to society's responsibility and our responsibility to promoting knowledge and awareness of good ethical behavior.
Your first point, I think, is really a good one. Ethical leadership is incredibly important. There are obviously lots of leadership models. I've seen most of them. I shared with you my leadership model. The way I look at it is, I can teach anyone leadership, the behaviors of leadership. During my time at the Procter & Gamble company, we were rated the top company for the development of leaders. But we spent a lot of time on it. I spent a lot of personal time. I probably spent 35% of my time on leadership development as the CEO of the company. But as we did that, and I could boil down every one of those E's into a collective set of behaviors, and I could train everybody to do those behaviors. But the thing that's more difficult to train, that you get in the military, that is harder to achieve in business, is the love that you have for the people you work with. In the military, because of the things you go through together, you love the people you're with. In fact, many studies in extremis leadership have shown that the bravery on the battlefield comes from the peer support, the peer work. And that's hard to replicate in business. But Bill George wrote a book called Authenticity. It's another way to look at it. I can teach you all the behaviors of leadership, but if those come from an inauthentic core, you're not going to inspire anyone. So how do you get that authenticity? How do you teach people to love the people they work with? I think in many ways, too often, we're unwilling to admit that we actually love people. And for me, that's what drives me. So I think that's a big part of ethical leadership, is authenticity and loving the people you work with. The second comment you had was about, remind me.
Society's responsibility for promoting awareness of
yes,
ethical, courageous leadership.
Well, that goes back to my point on, in a sense, on we spend too much time managing by exception. We spend too much time on things that negatively happen. And the way to motivate people is to focus on what's positive. Now, I have to say that we tend to have a media and we tend to have a government where parts of that government, parts of that media feel the only way to get attention is to talk something down or is to discover something. I mean, who won a Pulitzer Prize for being the investigative reporter that identified the doctor who fought for the lead in the water. So we need to change that. But that's in our control. We're the consumers of that media. So I think we could put a little bit more pressure on that. Thank you for your comments.
Hi, Secretary. Thank you for your comments.
I'm Bob, really. Please call me Bob if you don't mind.
That's going to be impossible for me to do, but thank you. Partly because I'm a military spouse, Jennifer McNulty.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Believe me, all of us know that not only does the individual in the military join the service, but that the family joins the service.
Quite so. That is
Quite so.
very true. And thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Actually, I'm coming to tell you that I had a wonderful meeting this morning with some of your team. I'm with Dog Tag
Yes.
Bakery and the Dog Tag Foundation, which is a partner of Georgetown University, and we're blessed to have their partnership. We are a VSO that takes military veterans and help bring them into the commercial world in terms of businesses that they would want to do themselves, or
Yes.
also into the commercial space. We're relatively new, and we were founded by a wonderful father, Father Curry, who recently passed away. But what I thought was so amazing about my morning, which is why I was a little late getting here, but I had an opportunity to meet with your team, the Veterans Experience Officers, which you recently stood
Tom
up.
Allen and his group.
Joyce Smith and
Joy,
a
yeah,
wonderful
yeah,
group of women and
yeah.
men. And I wanted to just applaud you for starting this organization within the VA, because I feel like it's the first time that we've really seen the VA go out into the community in this grassroots initiative
Yes.
to help reach out to the other VSOs and the individuals out there in need to really start bringing in this
Right.
community. And I thought it was just a wonderful...
Well, thank you. Let me explain that a little bit. My thought process was very simple. In 2014, when I got the job, we were in crisis. There was nobody defending the VA. And as I went out, I've been to over 300 different VA locations in a year and a half. As I went out, I discovered there were no advocates out there because we weren't embracing people. We weren't reaching out to them and involving them in what we were doing. And there was so much goodwill in the country that was a lost opportunity. That's why one of the strategies is strategic partnerships. So what I did was I created a Chief Veteran Experience Officer, which is a role you have in companies you don't have in government. And I hired a guy who had been with McDonald's for 27 years, took McDonald's to Europe. And I've hired some people who are in business, because VA is a business. And what we're doing now is using human-centered design. I don't know if they talked to you about that, but this is a technique that was developed with IDEO, which is a company in Palo Alto and San Francisco. We brought them in. We train people at the Procter & Gamble company, but we're training people in how do you design delightful experiences. You know, you look at what happens if you go to Disney. I worked with Bob Iger. Bob's helped us some on this too. You look at what happens off stage. You look at what happens on stage. You look what happens when the person, after the experience is over, and you redesign it for a wonderful experience. So there's technology here. There's knowledge here that business has been doing for a number of years, but somehow it's skipped by government.
It's just very exciting for us, and the fact that they're going to be partnering with us and helping us with the resources that they have and the resources that we have in order to support our veterans, it's very exciting, so thank you.
If you're interested in human-centered design, I'd be happy to send somebody over to help train your folks.
We would be ecstatic
Great.
for that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So I want to be mindful of time. So if it's okay, we can just take one last question.
It's up to you. I'm here.
Very much so. Mr. Secretary, good morning. First off, go Army, beat Navy.
Yes, sir. Please.
Very much
Particularly
so.
in football.
My name is Dinas Butners. I'm an MBA student, but I'm also an Afghan veteran. My question to you is this. One of the biggest lessons I learned as a separate platoon leader in the 101st Airborne Division in Kandahar, Afghanistan, was not necessarily what I was able to communicate to my soldiers in my platoon about what we needed to do, but with my higher organization or my superiors about what I need to make that mission happen. My question to you is this. This ongoing primary season has gotten me a little bit concerned. We have a number of presidential candidates who speak very bravely, who speak very forcefully about foreign policy, what we're going to do against ISIS. My division, the 101st, is gearing up to go to Iraq. My question to you, though, is this. What is your communications like right now? What is your dialogue with leaders in Congress? How have you conveyed that taking care of veterans is a cost of war that is borne amongst all of our families and all of us?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would draw your attention to my testimony at the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee last Thursday, where I laid out a 12-part plan for what I want to do get accomplished by the end of 2016, recognizing that's when the president's term went. And for each one of those 12 points, I talked about what we accomplished in 2015, what we plan to accomplish in 2016, and the legislative changes I needed, because I need about 9 different legislative changes. Most of the hearings that I've been in have always been about what happened 2 years ago, 3 years ago, about how VA is screwing up. And I got tired of that because nobody was paying attention to this transformation plan that I put together that we're working on that's leading to different results. Over 7 million incremental completed healthcare appointments, a disability claim backlog that's gone from 611,000 to 70,000. 36% reduction in homelessness. I can't get anybody's attention because if it bleeds, it leads in media, right? So I said, I'm going to hold my own hearing. I had a breakfast with our four corners, which are the ranking member and chairman of our 2 Senate and House committees, and I said, you know, if you guys aren't going to hold this hearing for me, I'm going to hold my own. So I scheduled it. I got the VFW to open up their amphitheater, and I continued on that track. There are a few members of Congress I've been working with on the transformation, so they went back to the chairman and they said, he's really serious about this. He's going to hold his own hearing. So they did have the hearing, and it's a great credit to Chairman Johnny Isaacson, who's a good partner, Dick Blumenthal, the ranking member. So we held our hearing. We covered the transformation plan, and I can't get involved in politics in my position, but my point is, this is our plan. This is what we're out there doing. Please join us because we need legislative changes to get it done.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I understand that there are a few more folks to have questions, but unfortunately, I'm going to have to conclude today.
Just email me at bob.mcdonald@va.gov.
But just to conclude again, thank you for coming to
Great to be
campus
with you.
and providing this open discourse about military topics and leadership and again, moving forward. And I hope everybody can take what we learned today and apply it in our day-to-day lives and so forth. And I also want to thank our Honorable Hagel for coming back to Georgetown and your opening remarks. So greatly appreciated. And thank you, President DeGioia, for assisting to make this happen today. And thank you to our audience and for the questions asked and taking part of this event today. So I wish you well.
Thank you all.